EX Troopers, or as the game would say, yeah. I think I like the way they say it better. It's a hyper-stylized third-person shooter. While the gameplay itself is fairly standard, I think the background of this game is actually kind of interesting. Now, and this is going to shock you, with the bright hyper-stylized aesthetic of this game, it's a Japanese exclusive! Now what might actually surprise you in a completely non-facetious way, this game is in the Lost Planet series. I'm seeing it. Tons of gunmetal gray and snow and not really any color or style or anything. Yep, definitely Lost Planet. I'm serious, this game is actually connected to Lost Planet for whatever reason, and it's the only one we didn't get. And judging by its appearance, it's the only one out of them I'd actually want to play. Now the story, or at least what I can figure it to be, is you play this random, hyper-excited, hot-blooded kid who is a student transferring to planet EDN-3. On his way there, he gets shot down by some alien invaders and crash lands in a giant robot suit. And from then on, he's shooting the indigenous wildlife of EDN-3. While on the topic of the story of the game, it's told through these neat comic book style panels, which helps to further emphasize the stylishness of this game. And while I think this is largely a plus, it has its drawbacks. For you see, it feels like the cutscenes were done by some 6-year-old hopped up on tons and tons of Skittles, because it refuses to stick to a singular medium. Sometimes you have standard cutscenes which just have your character models interacting with one another, as you'd expect from a standard cutscene. Other times you actually have these comic book ones where everything's moving, and it's really cool. Other times you have comic book stills, and the game doesn't really seem to know what it wants to do with them, because it's constantly swapping in and out. If this was done on an occasion, it could work to great effect to help emphasize certain moments, certain characters, and other bits of the narrative. But the way it's done just seems really inconsistent, and really just serves to point out how odd it is. The gameplay itself is a standard third-person shooter. Unlike most third-person shooters, however, it does not rely on a cover system. Instead, it relies on a dodging system. Essentially, you can dash to get out of the way of any attack, and this is kind of a key mechanic to the game. That said, while the gameplay does favor a high-speed evasion-based gameplay style, the controls don't really support it as they are kinda clunky. Likewise, dashing only works for X amount of feet. Essentially, once you start dashing, you'll only dash for about 10 feet, then stop. And it also takes a few seconds to start up your dash, which makes it a little bit awkward to try and dodge stuff, at least early on. You do pick up on it eventually. And then once it clicks, it works well. Now beyond that, the most interesting thing about this game, gameplay-wise, is it actually functions sort of like Baby's First Monster Hunter. Essentially, each level is a compartmentalized mission where you are either defending a point, or much more often taking out a group of smaller monsters or one large one. When you kill a monster, they'll drop bits and pieces which you can then cobble into new weapons. And these weapons help give the game a sort of fresh flair, because you've got stuff like ice shotguns, thunder mortar launchers, flaming rocket launchers, and the elements actually play into a greater rock, paper, scissors elemental weakness system. So while you might favor a shotgun, you might swap your equipment out to your rocket launcher simply because it works to your enemy's weakness to take it down faster. That of course actually relies heavily on knowing what your opponent is ahead of time, and if you can't read what's going on, that's a bit of a problem. Likewise, with problems with gameplay is actually unlocking the missions, because they seem almost random the way they pop up. Essentially, you run around this standard hub area until you get a mission. Sometimes it's unlocked by talking to certain NPCs, and that makes sense. But sometimes it happens through seemingly random events, like just walking around a certain bit of the hub. It's a bit confusing and largely unnecessary when you could simply just go to one centralized character to pick up your next missions, as a much simpler way of going about things. Presentation-wise, this game averages out to be decent. The sound design itself isn't wildly interesting or anything, but what really impressed me was, of course, the visual design. I mean, hell, that's why I actually bought this game. I saw some footage of it and thought, you know what? Yeah, this game looks cool. Let's see what it's all about. And you know what? It looks great. I love the cel-shaded style, which of course means it's gonna look timeless. There's tons of motion captured animation, which lends tons of personality to each and every individual character. So, I think that the visual design in this game is exceptional. Now, as an import, one of the biggest things you gotta consider is how easy this game is to play without knowing the language. And this game isn't great. Don't get me wrong, once you actually get into gameplay, it's completely playable without understanding the language. But trying to unlock the missions, trying to navigate through the menus, and customize your weapons is a bit of a drag. As well, sometimes trying to figure out what you're supposed to do in a mission isn't always totally clear. So it wouldn't hurt to have at least a rudimentary knowledge of the language. And either way, it's not a wildly expensive game. I got my copy for about $10, and for that price it was pretty good. But really, I got this game just because I thought it was an interesting talking point. I mean, this game is in the same series as Lost Planet. Now, don't get me wrong, the first Lost Planet was at least kind of interesting, but for the most part they were just sort of generic third-person shooters. Whereas this one, while it is a generic third-person shooter, it's super, super crazy stylish, and once again, we North Americans aren't allowed to have it. And I guess, at the end of the day, this just goes to further prove my feelings of, while I think it's insane to want one extreme over the other consistently, if I had to, I want every game to be Jet Set Radio instead of Call of Duty. Because I'm sick of games that are all brown and gray and bloom. Come on. Add some color every once in a while. It won't kill you. In fact, it might actually make your games interesting. Like EX Troopers.